I was the classic introvert who became an extrovert. There was a great gang mentality about the band, you know, and they trusted me. When we moved to Aylesbury, there was the unit there. We had the band, and with the band, we could do things. And the band just needed somebody to drive it. The Machine had no respect for what I was as a person, you know, as a human being. You know, I was just somebody that was the lead singer in a band that made a shitload of money that a lot of people made a lot of money from. Being famous, it can get you a table at the best restaurant, but you can be guaranteed there's going to be a lot more waiters hanging about waiting on tips. If I get plastered now, it takes me about 2 days, 3 days to recover. And I remember I walked out the restaurant naked, and then I'll come back in again because I left my belt. Some waiters somewhere in Berlin that have got photographs of me naked in a restaurant, they probably don't even know it's me.
Fish, as I just said, look at you, look at me. What happened to us? Where did all those years go?
We turned into fucking badgers.
Oh, brilliant. But listen, I was thinking the other day when we talked we've met a few times, but we've met sort of two main times. One time was a very interesting weekend at your home. And yeah, that was when I was with Viva Television in Germany. And the thing that I remember about that time was I think it was you, it was your then wife, Tamara, and a mate of yours. I can't remember which mate it was of yours, the name, but then we were drinking. See, you can't remember this. I love this. I can see it in your face. Okay, yeah. And then we were drinking and I fell asleep on the sofa and I woke up a couple of hours later and nothing had changed. Is that true? I can't remember. That's what I told myself when I was.
Yeah, there was a lot of moments. It was yeah, that sounds a bit like, you know, a typical night in the old house. It was like, you know, it just went on forever, and it's like parties went on forever back then. Things have changed since, you know. I mean, I moved out of that house in 2001, and I'm now in the studio. So this is the control room of the studio.
Okay, and I remember that we went. I think it was the weekend of the Three Nations, and Scotland were playing England in a rugby match, and we went to the local pub. And as we walked in, you went, "He's an Englishman." And I thought I was going to get murdered, but instead everyone bought us drinks, which was much nicer than being murdered. Now, the other time I met you, what's interesting about that weekend for me was the state of my life at that time. I knew my career was over. You know, I was working for a TV channel. I knew I was going to get fired not long after. I knew I was on a downfall, and I knew everything was sort of going pretty wrong in my life. And the weird thing is that I found an interview on the net, which is when I interviewed you in 1988 for MTV. And at that period, you had left Marillion, and you were openly exploring in the interview what you were thinking about doing next. It's quite a fascinating, there's some fascinating pieces in that, which I don't think I realized at the time. I mean, I was, you know, I was young and naive and not very experienced back then. And I think for me, I didn't take that in. But it's really interesting looking at today that you were at a point that felt like a little bit, not the same, obviously, but a little bit like my point later on when I came to you for a weekend, that you were also in a little bit of a crisis. And these two interviews, I sort of want to bring into this interview later, but do you have anything to say about that interview now?
I can't even remember it.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say
that's the impact I have on people.
As of yesterday, I just managed to get a license back from Warner's for Vigil for my first solo album, and they've been really cool with me. And like, it's taken me a long time, but I mean, so putting together that Vigil album, I would love to be able to watch it and maybe use the bits that was an NTV interview.
Yeah. It says, if you look up Channel 4, which is really weird, a man called Fish, you can find it, but I don't know why people put it under Channel 4 because it was MTV. But anyhow, that's how you can find it. It's really simple to find. One thing that the reason I mention those 2 points in life is because I think for all the people I've interviewed over the years, that I've always found that in their beginning of their life, in their childhood, there's a point where their drive comes from. And for me, you've always had this immense drive to push forward in your life, to do things, to achieve things, to, you know, when you're in Marillion, it was almost like, you know, you were very much the driving force. And I think it's really interesting where that comes from. So can you tell me a little bit about your childhood and where you believe that drive may have come from?
That's a really difficult question. I think with regard to music, I mean, I think that the drive really came in from the music side of stuff. I mean,
from what you were listening to as a kid?
No. It came from, how did I go into this? You know, when I was a kid, although I had a lot of friends, I was still relatively solitary. There was a lot of introspection went on, even, you know, especially when I became a teenager. And I loved music because it made me feel better about a lot of the emotions that were kind of coursing through my mind and body at that time, you know. And I think progressive rock in the main as well offered, I wouldn't call it a kind of fantasy, a fantasy experience, you know, which a lot of people attribute to progressive rock. But I loved the introspection that I was hearing from people like Greg Lake and that alternative reality, I suppose, that was your pre-drugs, and that it offered, you know, there was a kind of escapism in it all. And, you know, I used to listen to a lot of music in the attic of my house. I mean, gets really complicated, but in the house we had in Dalkeith, when the house was set up, when my grandfather was alive and lived with us, my sister and I was basically given 2 attic rooms because it was the only space they had. And it was a big room. And I used to listen to a lot of music when I was in my early teens up there, you know. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know what I wanted to be, right? I wanted to be an archaeologist because I loved history, and I've always have, and I still retain a fascination and a great love of history. I think some of it's got to do with just the stories, and maybe again there's a certain deal of escapism. And my imagination was always fertile. I mean, I was very good at English at school, although I didn't like it. When I was at high school, I got, you know, I had an 8 higher, and, you know, and et cetera, and I hated English, but I was very good at it, and it was imaginative writing. I mean, even in Latin, I was rubbish at Latin, but when it came to writing an imaginative kind of piece on the life of a slave, you know, I got top marks for it, you know. And it was so you had a love of words. I loved reading, and you know, and books were a great kind of salve for me when I was young. I mean, it was Biggles, it was Edgar Rice Burroughs and stuff, and all that kind of stuff when I was, before I found music. Then I went into music and went into a very literary type of music, right? And I think words were always going to be my mainstay. You know, writing was always going to be my mainstay, and I couldn't play an instrument at school. I can't even play a recorder. You know, my mind, my head to my hands does not work, be it with drumsticks or be it fingers in a piano or fingers around strings. It doesn't work. I can't do it, right? And I still to this day don't understand music. You know, you could sit and pick up a guitar and play something, play a riff, and I will find a melody and I will find words and create something with you on that, you know. And this was all part and parcel of that journey from, I think, from my late teens, when I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an archaeologist, but because I didn't have Latin, I didn't have the classic, I couldn't go to university to study archaeology without a classic language behind me, right? So that was kiboshed, right? Then I wanted to go in the army because a fascination I had with military modelling, which was again related to history. And I was going to join the army, and I was interviewed. I think it was 3 interviews for Sandhurst Officers College, right? And I failed on the last one when I was interviewed by a major, and he deemed me as being kind of like too awkward. I think the question was, if there were a bunch of guys playing football and there were one short and you were an officer and they were all ranks, what would you do? Would you play in the game? I went, yeah. Why? Because I feel that, you know, I should be able to be part of a team, you know, no, that's wrong. And then I ended up having a huge argument and walked out. So that was the army kibosh. And on top of that, I wanted to go into tanks, right? And they said I was too big. And I refused to hump gear across mountains, right? It's like, no, that's no fun. I want to, if I'm going to go anywhere, I'm driving. And so the army went out the window. And then for some reason, I found myself in forestry. Biology was something I was good at school. My 3 major topics at school were basically biology, history, and English. Right?
But were you an outsider at school? Were you someone that the kids treated as an outsider? I mean, I know there's, you know, your real name, Dick, you know, you can imagine at school, it's, you know, you're called everything because you've got a surname, Dick.
Yeah.
I don't know what if you were massively tall at school or, you know, you were quite big, weren't you? Physically big.
I was very tall. And I was a very late developer. You know, when I was in the changing rooms, when I used to play basketball because of my height, you know, so all the other guys, you know, to me looked like, you know, gorillas, you know, and I was hairless, you know. And I remember shaving my legs because I was told that if you actually shave your legs, you know, the hair comes back faster, right? I've still got 2 bald patches on my legs when I shaved them, right? So, yeah, I mean, I was a bit of a character, and I was kind of introverted. I was the classic introvert who became an extrovert, you know? And, you know,
So the extrovert side was to sort of save you from this onslaught from the other kids, to actually then appeal to them in a way.
Yeah, and it was, you know, it's like Woody Allen and stuff, you know, read, you know, kind of his kind of things, and other comedians and stuff. And you start making jokes and you start becoming self-depreciatory, you know, and to make people laugh, because if you can make people laugh, you had a certain power over them, you know. And that was kind of what I did. And, you know, but that was entwined with, you know, I mean, I never lost my virginity till I was 21, you know, and all the girls talked to me, but like, none of them would take it any further than that, right? So, I mean, there was all that came into it. There was a lot of kind of, a whole turmoil of emotions that were kicking around at that time. And music, as I said, was kind of like, my attic was a sanctuary, and music was kind of like where I used to escape. So I went into forestry after I left high school, mainly because I didn't have anything, I didn't know what to do. And I went into forestry, and there were certain aspects of it I did genetics for a year, then I went into like a proper, what you might call an industrial forest with a chainsaw for another year. Then I went to college and I studied it for a year, came out, and it was in that year, in 1980, that things started to change. And that was when I did my first gig. And that was all related to this thing about music. And I really wanted to be a singer. I always wanted to be a singer. And when I was a kid, there was a great big walnut kind of wardrobe, a big full-length wardrobe with a mirror in it, with a full-length mirror in it, that was underneath the attic. So that was where you went up the stairs to the attic. You pulled down these cantilevered stairs and you went up to the attic where the music was. But kind of later on, what I used to do was play music really loud. And the pole that I used to pull down the hatch, to pull the ladder down, that became a microphone stand. And I used to pose in front of the mirror, which was where the whole idea for the songs from the Mirror album that I did in 1993, it was related to a lot of the songs that I heard at that time. And I always loved music, and I wanted to get involved in it, but I didn't know how to, you know. And it was when I was at Newtonrigg College, I met a guy whose father knew somebody who was Bob Dylan's agent or something. And it was suddenly, there was a way into this thing, right? And when I went into forestry in 1980, I was in the Borders in Scotland, and that was when I did my first audition for a band in Edinburgh that I failed dramatically, right? I mean, I'd never sang in a microphone, a real microphone before. And when I did the audition, I think I was standing about 3 feet away from the mic, you know? And, you know, it was like working with a band. It was a really strange experience, but I kind of loved it. I got a real kind of boost out of it. And it was a girlfriend at the time, you know, who said to me, you know, you should become a singer. You've got a great voice. And
what was the boost you got? Because I remember talking, you probably know the guy, Simon Napier Bell, the manager. And he always used to say of kids who wanted to be pop stars, who wanted to be singers, that their dream was often to solve, all their problems would be solved once they were the famous singer, once they were on stage and the famous singer. And he said that often what would happen is they would get the girls, they would get the drugs, but their problems, what they hoped would dissolve, would actually enlarge. So was there sort of something that you had in your head, by being on stage, by being a singer, it would give you something that you didn't have before? Or was it purely about expression?
Expression. I wanted to, it excited me, you know. I mean, I think, you know, the dream of being a singer in a band, I mean, it was a dream, right? And I remember going to see Peter Gabriel in 1980, and he was on the China 84 tour. And this is just a true story, right? I went along to see him. The support band were Random Hold. They were playing at Edinburgh Odeon. And I went in, and the PA went down, and he had loads of issues on stage. And he didn't deal with them at all well. And suddenly this person who had seen with Genesis on the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway tour, you know, about four years before, I was watching this very nervous character. And I kind of saw him in a very different light, you know. And I went, wait a minute, you know, he's human, right? And after the gig, right, I walked out into the foyer, and there was a guy there who I was at school with called Gordon Feeney, who was a drummer. And he was the guy who was most likely to become a rock star in the school. You know, his dad bought him a drum kit. He was a great drummer. He was a big Carol Palmer fan, and Premier kit, which was like, wow, right? And he was in the foyer, and he said, do you still want to become a singer? Because, you know, I talked about, I'd love to be a singer. But he says, do you still want to be a singer? And I went, yeah. And he said, do you want to audition for a band? He said, we've got a band called Not Quite Red Fox. He said, we're looking for a singer. And he said, yeah. He said, I'll give you a bell. And I went, whoa, an opening. And I remember leaving the foyer, and I thought, you know what? I went round the back to the backstage door, and I knocked on the door, and opened it. Says, hello, I'm a German journalist. My name is Dirk, and I'm supposed to be doing an interview with Peter, and my plane was late, and blah, blah, blah. Made up a load of cock and bull story, right?
And this is true.
This is true.
Yeah, okay.
And I walked in, right, into the backstage area, and was face to face with Peter Gabriel, right? It wasn't even hang about. I basically walked through the door, and he was like, you know, he must have been moving about in the backstage area. And I was like, hi, Peter, how are you doing? And I said, really loved the show, and it was so different. I made up some, you know, like, it was really great. Can I get your autograph? And he autographed the ticket, and I've still got it. And it's reversed, right? So the autograph's on the back, and it's still on a framed yes poster from my very first gig. And all the tickets I went to the 1970s. But I had Peter Gabriel's autograph, and I met him, and he was this little guy. And I went, you know what? I could do this. And it started to get me, my confidence started to bubble a little bit. And then I went to the audition, and it all fell apart, right? But I came out of the audition, and I was more determined than ever to become a singer in a band. And I went down to Galashiels with my girlfriend, who I was kind of staying with off and on at that time, right? And there was a bunch of people in this flat, and I said to him, does anybody know, where's the bands? Where do you find, you know, people who are in bands? And somebody said, you've got to go meet a guy called Dottle, right? He said, he's a drummer in a band. And he said, he drinks in the Golden Lion in Galashiels, right? So basically, the next night, I went down to the Golden Lion, walked into the Golden Lion, which was a little pub on the corner of Galashiels, right, and the corner of the A7. Walked up to the bar, ordered a pint, turned around to this guy. I said, I'm looking for a guy called Dottle. I said, I'm trying to get a job in a band. And the guy says, I'm Dottle, right? And he said, and we're looking for a singer. And he said, you'll come up in the audition in 3 days' time. And it was that fast. And in 3 days' time, I went up to the audition and they said, what do you want to sing? And it was a tiny little cottage way up in the wilderness at the back of Galashiels.
And you played in that pub, didn't you? You played in that Red Lion pub.
Yeah, the Golden Lion, yeah.
Golden Lion,
I went up to the cottage, and Frank Usher was on guitars, right? And there was a bunch of other guys, all old guys, and they were basically a hobby band. You know what I mean? It was just, you know, they were just playing about. They loved playing. What do you want to sing? I said, I don't know. He said, do you know this number, Genesis? No. He said, you know, no, we don't have a keyboard player, right? And they said, well, what do you know? I said, All Right Now. He said, okay. And they launched it All Right Now, and I sung All Right Now. And he went, you're in the band. There's a cassette. Learn these songs. There's the lyric sheets. You'll be doing a gig next Thursday. And then the following Thursday, I went into the Golden Lion, had a bunch of pints before the band had even arrived. Then had a couple of whiskeys to get and I'm so adrenalined up, even at that point, right? And the band came in, we loaded equipment up, and we did the gig, and I sung things like, I did some Ry Cooder songs. I did Walk On By, which was the original kind of Aretha High vocal one, right? I did a couple of Steely Dan numbers, which was like Night by Night, and I did All Right Now, and Baby Please Don't Go, that kind of stuff. And I was rubbish. And I dressed all in white because I thought that's what singers wore. So I had a white kind of Indian hemp shirt on, white flares, right? And after the gig, right, it was like da-da-da, and I was like, totally pissed. And then realized I was going to throw up, ran from the stage straight to the toilet and threw up all over the wall and my white uniform, right? And the band were going to fire me, and Frank Usher said, the boy's got something, right? He said,
yeah, he'd seen the toilet wall.
Yeah. He said, we should keep him. He said, he's got something. And that was my first gig, and that was it was in about May the 1st, I think it was 1980.
When did you discover the power of words for you? Because I think one of the interesting things that what you have really brought into music is words, is your lyrics. And that was something, you know, really dynamic and new, and something that you took into your solo career more, what you couldn't actually extend in Marillion, you would take into your solo career. But words obviously played a massive part in your life. So when did you discover the power of them? And when did you discover that you really had the power in words?
That wasn't until I joined Marillion. I mean, you know, I'd written bits and pieces of poetry in 6 year that people really liked, and that have been long since gone. And funnily enough, this is another really strange story. And I've got it there. I've got the album there. Oh, Genesis Duke, right? This album was found in a second-hand shop, right, in Falkirk about a year ago, right? And somebody said, the woman that found it said, I don't know if this is you. She said, I know your name's Derek Dick. And on the back of it, I've got, there's a handwritten poem called The Allotment. And it's snowdrop unfurls, virgin glory resplendent, among brambles of anguish with the thorns of sorrow. Must my lifeblood decorate these barbs, nourish the roots before I can cherish the solitary stem of completion. Laughter and happiness dissipate the weeds of depression that clutch at my feet and scar my heart. Will I savour the flower of fulfilment, or will I remain another crying jester caught forever in these brambles of malice? Right? And I wrote this.
Can you hold it up to the camera? Can I see it?
Yeah. Right.
Right.
I wrote that in 1980, and it was found in a second-hand shop, and I wrote it for a girl that was staying in the flat. And it's like I mean, if you read it, I'll look at it now and you go like, oh, for God's sake, you know what I mean? But I wrote that, and it's the first evidence of my writing that was ever found in a second-hand shop in Falkirk. And she sent it to me, and it's got the reference to another crying jester. And that was 2 years before Script for Justice here, right? And she sent me that, and that's what I did. But I loved words, And I started to write bits and pieces of words in 1980, but I didn't know where, none of the band that I was in, which was called Blew It, they didn't want to write. They just wanted to play covers and, you know, play Raikuda and blah, blah, blah and shit, you know? And I wanted to write. And because I couldn't play an instrument, then it was natural for me to offer myself as a lyricist and become a writer. Then I left forestry in that summer, and I went down, joined a band auditioned for a band in Kettering called Stranger, and that was a new wave of British heavy metal band, and I just didn't like it. And they said, your voice isn't loud enough, right? And the first band that I auditioned for, Not Quite Red Fox, said, come back when you get a bit more experience. The second band said, your voice isn't loud enough. Then I joined this band down in Retford, right, called the Stone Dome Band, and met up with Diz Minute, the bass player. And we eventually came back up to Scotland to try and start a band up in the borders of Scotland, where I'd been singing, which was a waste of time. There was no way you were going to start a progressive rock band up in the borders of Scotland and make it happen. So the two of us lived in this cottage, like in the wilderness. I mean, it's like you couldn't have been any wilder than where this place was. Hawkshaw's cottage. I mean, it even sounds something like Emily Bronte, you know. And it was and we stole coal and stole turnips and, you know, and survived. Lived in one room, and we wrote I wrote Garden Party lyric there. I wrote The Web there. And we were getting desperate, and that was when, you know, we found an advert for a band in the back of the Musicians Only weekly newspaper that was at the time. Put our last 10 pence or whatever in the telephone box at Ettrick Bridge, phoned them up, and they bullshitted us, and we bullshitted them about like how many people we knew, and they told us that they were doing massive gigs and blah, blah, blah. And we went, let's go for it. I sent them down a tape where I sang over the left-hand channel of the stereo over Genesis songs, Yes songs. And we said they originally wanted a bass player who could sing. And we said, well, there's a bass player and there's a singer here. Will you take the two of us? And we drove down in January 1981. And we drove down to Aylesbury with no intent of coming back. And that was when I met Marillion. And that was when I started writing. And that was where I found the power of my words, you know?
I mean, what's interesting about that, let's call it audition, is the audition you're describing as sort of not really an audition, because in a sense they're also auditioning to you, because they were desperate you were desperate for a band, or you two were desperate for a band, and they were desperate for a bass player and a singer. So it's the perfect combination.
I think perhaps Diz and I were the more desperate parties.
But
yeah, we went down to Aylesbury, and like, you know, I think it was January the 3rd we arrived, or something like that, or the 4th. Met up with the guys in the pub, and the next day we went up to this little mouldy studio, and I sang a couple of things with them and jammed a couple of things, and they said, you're in, you know, and that was it. And then we started writing, you know, and that was it. Yeah. But, you know, that was The Web and stuff, and Garden Party, He Knows You Know, was written in the unemployment benefit office when I was working there, when I was trying to just get money to keep a flat together, you know. So it was but yeah, I mean, it was a great match. I mean, it was like, you know, I knew that my words were never going to be, you know, I was never going to be in a heavy metal band or a pop band or whatever with words that I was writing. My mind wasn't in that frame. But progressive rock and what I wanted to do as a lyricist or as a wordsmith, you know, was the perfect match. And Marillion were open to ideas at that time. You know, they were quite happy to take it on, and then we just developed. And, you know, I did my first gig in what was it, March 81, I think it was, or something, and it was you know, petrified, wore the face makeup because I was so nervous about going on stage. But I was still wearing all white.
But you really, okay. Was it true though, on the in that audition, that after going to the pub, you went back to the flat, because they all shared a flat, I think, as well. So you went back to the flat, stripped off naked, and sort of fell into a ditch. Is this true?
No.
You can't remember. No, definitely not. You wouldn't remember.
I've done that before, but I don't remember.
Don't remember it that time. Okay. The other thing that I read was that they were impressed with you, but they weren't so keen on Diz. But you were very much loyal in terms of it's both of us or none of us.
Exactly.
That's quite I mean, I know it's a real friendship thing, but on the other hand, it's a really difficult thing to say, isn't it? When you've got an opportunity like that. I mean, it's pokering, you know, as well. Did you feel that?
It wasn't quite as played as that, you know. It was kind of. I don't think it was ever really brought to the surface at that point. You know, it was. But I mean, you know, I was joining with Diz, and there was no way I was going to walk away for Diz. I mean, Diz and I were joining that band, you know, and you know, it wasn't as if, you know, they didn't have any gigs or anything at that time. I mean, they had nothing. You know, it wasn't as if they could, like, you know, there was no other bass player, right? And the drummer wasn't that great. You know, it was like, it wasn't as if they could start, oh, we want Chris Squire. That's what we're really hoping for. You know, obviously, it was never like that. But I mean, you know, we came together and Diz and I stuck together, and it was good having Diz and I being a couple at that time, and as far as, you know, being a couple of really bonded mates. You know what I mean? It was good for the both of us, and you know, it gave us a little bit more leverage in the band when it came to making decisions and things. Not that there was any real, you know, because they didn't have any idea. You know, they were just fanning about, right? In all honesty, and they had no idea how to take it forward and break it forward. And there was somebody who was called Guy, who was the, inverted commas, the manager, right? He was a bit of an arse, right? And he wasn't really getting anything for us. So I was like, okay, that was where the drive kicked in. You know, it was like, you know, I'd say that the drive started. It went into first gear when I left forestry, and it kind of pittered about in the lower gears, you know, until I joined Marillion. And once I had got into Marillion, and there was you know, I had the unit, because that was what Diz and I didn't have. When we moved to Aylesbury, there was the unit there. We had the band, and with the band, we could do things. And the band just needed somebody to drive it. And nobody else in the band wanted to drive it, right? Mick Pointer was working as a joiner. He was quite happy in his house, living with his partner at the time. Steve Rothery was kind of, you know, pretty much in my kind of mindset, because he'd come all the way down from Yorkshire to join the band before, and they'd gone nowhere. They'd done nothing, right? And Brian Jelliman, the keyboard player, he worked in the unemployment benefit office, and, you know, wasn't really that interested in going professional. He liked to play about and fantasize about being Tony Banks, but, like, you know, it was really Steve and Diz and I that kind of really started to move it, you know, and then I took control. You know? Yeah,
and also what's interesting, I mean, you mentioned the going backstage Peter Gabriel story. In a sense, you used the same sort of techniques, didn't you? You got in front of people, you phoned people up, you made sure you were in the right place at the right time to get the band a gig, to get the band pressed, to actually also bring other people into the band. And it does feel like you were such the major drive in, I don't know really if this is the right word, but you know, when you want everything to be perfect and you're a perfectionist, you have the feeling, wherever I read the sort of Marillion story, it's the feeling is you're the perfectionist, you're the one who's pulling the band along, saying, we've got to get better, this has got to work, like the drummer's a bit weak, you know, and all this stuff. Was it like that? And did they see you as a tyrant?
I think now they look back, and now I think they look back at me as being a bit of a tyrant, but I wasn't a tyrant. I mean, it was all for the band. I mean, there was a great gang mentality about the band, you know, and they trusted me, you know, and I was learning all the time. I mean, I had never done this before, right? And I had a book. It was called How to Become a Rock and Roll Star, and I think I've still got it somewhere, right? And
who wrote that? Do you know?
Huh?
Do you remember who wrote that?
I can't really remember, but it was basically, it was like, this is what an agent does, this is what a record contract is, and it was so simple, you know, and that was my Bible, right? And, you know, I kind of realized, you know, it said press agent, you need to get somebody to help you with your press and things, and I happened to bump into Pippa Lang, and she was on the train as we were heading down to Marylebone, and I can't remember what I was going down there for, but I was going to London to meet something or hand a demo in or something like that. And I remember she told me at the time, and this is really wild, because she said that she knew that Alan Parker was putting together The Wall, and they were looking for somebody to play Pink, right? And she said, you'd be perfect to play Pink, right? And she said, if you want, actually, I can maybe see if we can get you an audition for it, right? And we were talking at the same time. I'm trying to go, like, I need a press officer. We need to find somebody. And she said, Keith Goodwin. She said, you need to go to Keith Goodwin. He used to deal with Yes and stuff like that. And I went, bam. And I set up an appointment, met him in Oxford Street in this tiny little office up there that had gold albums from Yes on the wall, which was like, wow. And we took him on for 120 quid a month. And he got us our first articles in the Sounds. And Keith was a hugely important part in the development of Marillion, because he got us in the Kerrang and the Sounds and the Melody Maker. And, you know, I was booking all the gigs at that time and sorting the demos out and trying to further the band. You know, I remember I went down to ITV agency in Wardour Street, you know, I walked in to meet this agent and trying to get onto the support on the Greg Lake tour. And he said, well, we want £3,000 support. And I left the office going, how can we find £3,000? And we're all phoning up our parents, trying to borrow money from here, there and everywhere to get the £3,000 to buy on the Greg Lake tour, not even knowing what we were going to do once we got on the bloody tour, right? And it was that, but I was driven. I couldn't go back. I mean, my dad wasn't happy with me leaving forestry. Neither was my mum. And you know, I'd given up a lot in the same way Steve Rothery had done, and I didn't want to give up. You know, this was what I wanted to do. By hook or by crook, I was going to like be in a band. Money didn't drive me. It was never the money. It was never, you know, the kind of the girls. They were just, you know, bonus things, right? But I mean, you know, it was the band. It was like, let's write songs, play people, convince people that the band's great. You know, develop the face makeup, book the gigs. It didn't matter where we were playing, whether it was Annie's Wine Bar in Chesham or where we were playing, you know, in the backwater of Luton somewhere. It was like we went on to make an impression, and I built. I kind of planned tours around places so that we were always building and bringing fans in that were coming in carloads, coming to these shows. And then we built it up. And then I recognized we needed a gig in London where it could become our home spot, where people could come and see us, because nobody in the A&R departments was going to come to Aylesbury, right? So we needed London. And that was when Keith Goodwin managed to introduce me to the manager of the Marquee, Nigel Hutchins. And I managed to blag a support spot to Girl on the 20th October 1981, and we brought 2 buses of fans from Aylesbury and blew Girl off the stage. Right? And that was our first step at the Marquee.
Was that the moment, I don't know whether it was, but was that the moment where you realised that you were a performer at your best on stage? The moment where you realised it all came together? Or was that a later moment? I just wonder whether the Marquee was the moment where everything started to come together for you personally. I know there were other membership changes along on the way, but for you as a performer on stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we got to the Marquee Club, it was a huge marker. And I think when we sold out the Marquee the first time, we supported Girl, then we supported Spider in January. And then we played it then we went on in 1982, I booked a Scottish tour, and that was when we went professional, right? That's when everybody left their jobs, and it's like, we're going to take the jump now. And we took the jump, and it was a huge jump, and it was, you know, coming up to play Scotland. If it hadn't been for my dad putting petrol in the van, right? If it hadn't been for the fact that we could stay at my mum and dad's kind of, they had like a holiday home down in North Berwick, like a little flat. And we stayed there, and that was our core point, where we went to all these different gigs all across Scotland. And then we came back, and then it moved into, you know, the Marquee. We were selling at the Marquee in 1982, and you know, people couldn't ignore us then. You know, when we were doing 2 nights at the Marquee, you know, people couldn't turn around and say, well, it's, you know, why is this band not signed? And people started coming to see us. Tony Stratton-Smith from Charisma Records, who had their offices above the Marquee in Wardour Street, he was coming down, and you know, there was a great buzz about the band, and it was only a matter of time. But I didn't know how to take it into the next level, you know. And I mean, we'd been rejected by every major record company, including EMI, on the very first demos, which had He Knows, You Know, Garden Party, and Chart and Single on it, right? And, you know, Garden Party was a top 20 single. And that was all, they were all rejected. I've still got every rejection letter from every record company, right? And basically, it was like we needed a manager to bust us forward. And then we eventually settled on John Arneson. But I mean, you know, we talked to other people. Pete Mensch, who managed Def Leppard, he wanted us, and he didn't want us, he wanted me. And he took me aside and he said, like, I want to sign you, but I don't want the band. And I said,
did
well,
they
I'm
know
not
about
signing.
that?
Yeah, I'm
Did
not
they
signing
know about
anymore.
that at the time, the other members of the band?
Yeah, I think they did. I told them, you know. But it's but I mean, we just said, no, it's a band. I'm saying, you know, we're signing as a band. We've come this far as a band. Like I said, there was still the gang mentality, and they trusted me. You know that I wasn't tired of them. I don't think they were scared of me. I mean, I think there's a lot of stories come out since, you know, that a lot of them I don't relate to at all, and you know, and some of them are just complete bullshit, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's always internal creative differences in a band. I mean, you're going to argue about things, you know, certainly creatively. One of the things that I think is very difficult from a band that's really at a point of getting a record contract, dealing with a manager, and dealing with outside forces on your creativity. How did that work? Because how did you, I mean, making songs that are extremely long, not making radio edit songs, as it were, for a record company is a difficult one. It's particularly at that era. It wasn't something that was really done, was it? So how did you deal with the outside influences on the band? Did you deal with it as a band, or were you the one who had to go and sort of argue and just say, well, this is what we're doing, take it or leave it?
It was, I spoke up, but it was agreed as a band. We still worked, we still made decisions together. Like, for example, Tony Stratton Smith sent his one of his right-hand men, who's actually an accountant, sent him up with the A&R guy, and they came up, ironically, to Retford to see us play up there. And Mick Pointer and I were put up in a hotel so that we could have a discussion, you know, with the guys for Charisma. Tony Stratton Smith sent them up, and we'd already agreed as a band that we were not signing a single deal, right? And a lot of the deals that were on offer at the time were, we'll do 2 singles, and if they work, we'll give you an album deal. And we just said, no, we're an albums band, you know, so we want an album deal. And Tony Stratton Smith had sent these guys up to Retford and told them, in no uncertain times, get Marillion signed. And they drove up in a big Rolls Royce and put us up in a hotel, tried to basically, you know, play the magician trick on us, right? And it's like, we'll do 2 singles, and, like, you know, we'll do the album. And we just went no, right? And Tony Stratton Smith went absolutely mental. And Charisma, if Charisma had offered us an album deal at that point, we would have signed it. But because this guy offered 2 singles, and we just went, no, that's not what we're doing. And I think they were shocked by kind of, it's like when they've just turned Charisma down. But that was when, it was after that when John Arneson got involved. It was like it moved forward. But it was hard for me to relinquish the reins, you know. And, you know, and I think, you know, John Arneson and I had a lot of head-to-heads. You know, I did question a lot of things that were done, you know. But I trusted him at the front, you know, to some extent. You know, I wasn't completely sure when we took him on board. But, you know, he managed John Cooper Clarke, Pauline Murray and the Invisible Girls and things. He had a band called Rage. He knew he was what we needed at that time, you know. And I think, you know, as the years went by, I think we outgrew him, and we could have done with a better manager. But at that time, it was, you know, it was an important jump for us.
I mean, I want to jump a few years because this is called The History Makers. And, you know, the pinnacle of success and where everything seemed to come together was, of course, Misplaced Childhood. Yeah. And I just wondered how, when that success started and you really got, you know, you really achieved massive, massive success, how that then affected you personally, and whether you felt like you'd achieved everything you wanted to at that moment.
Well, it was a kind of, it was a very slow metamorphosis, really, from, you know, when we did the Script album, right? And then we started playing bigger gigs. Then we had lighting crew. Then we had proper sound crew. Then we were like, you know, staying in proper hotels. And then Fugazi, which was a very difficult album to make, which was the difficult second album. And there was a lot of drugs kicking around during Fugazi. I mean, you know, Marillion were never the kind of, you know, arty-farty band that a lot of people kind of made us out to be. You know, we weren't an art college band, you know. And I think me especially, I mean, I was quite a hedonist, and, you know, I enjoyed all the trappings of being in a moderately successful band at that time. And then I think when we went into Germany in 1983, and then especially in 1984, that was when we started to realize it was really happening, you know. But at the same time, you know, we'd done videos and we'd done a lot of the things you associate with, like, you know, this is, wow, you know, big band stuff. But at the same time, you know, we were ramming up a lot of debt with EMI, you know, and we were close to being dropped before Misplaced. And I think the attitude with Misplaced was, what are we going to do next? And it's like, well, let's do a concept album. And I had to come up with a concept, which I did, you know, as loose as it is. And my writing had changed. I think I became more confident in what I was writing. I was a lot more open and honest about myself when I was writing, rather than hiding it within kind of all sorts of things. And then there was, you know, my personal life at the time was in turmoil. I mean, you know, the big long relationship with Kay had broken up finally in 1984, and, you know, it was a do or die moment really with the record company. And then they sent us away to Berlin, which was perfect, so nobody could hear what we were doing unless they flew all the way out to Tempelhof, and, you know, and made the effort.
So you were at Hansa Studios, weren't you?
Yeah. And
chucking things over the wall.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Huh?
Tell me about that. You were chucking things over the wall at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like the hotel we had to get to. It was like a U shape, right? And on the base of the U was the wall, and on the right-hand side of the U was an alley that went down to the wall that had our shitty hotel in it, and on the other side was Hansa Studios. So every time we went from the hotel, we went over the wall. And we used to get pitched up and throw bricks over the wall trying to set off landmines that we thought were over the other side.
Now, don't worry, I'm not going to stop the interview. I just want to ask you to subscribe, because it helps me and it allows you to know about the interviews when they're uploaded on the YouTube channel. Okay, back to the interview.
Hansa Studios is, of course, you know, iconic, isn't it? Lust for Life, yeah. Bowie's Heroes, you know, and Bowie, you know, in the song is also looking over the wall. So there's, you know, references there. Berlin, of course, I mean, Berlin is, as you know, I live in Germany, and Berlin is an absolute brilliant city, but it's a city where I've always felt if I lived in Berlin, I would not only get lost, I'd probably end up in a gutter one day, which is why I never moved there. How did you feel about Berlin?
Gutters were great.
Yeah, you did end up in a gutter. No.
I did end up very naked in Berlin. I remember I walked through a restaurant naked. Right? It was in a bet. We were all, we all went out with Chris Kimsey, the producer, one night to this Austrian kind of Tyrolean restaurant. We used to go up there on a Sunday because they had Tafelspitz, which was the closest we could get to roast beef, right? And we went up one night and we all got very, very drunk. And we were drinking Drambuie or something. I can't remember what it was. And or rusty nails. And Mark Kelly dared me to walk naked through the restaurant, right? So I went down to the toilet, stripped absolutely butt naked, came out, walked up, sat at the table. Is everybody all right? Like, paid me the money, and I remember I walked out the restaurant naked, and then I'll come back in again because I left my belt, right? And there was loads of waiters taking photographs of us. So like somewhere, there's some waiters somewhere in Berlin that have got photographs of me naked in a restaurant. They probably don't even know it's me, right? But it was, but yeah, Berlin was brilliant. It was a fantastic place. At that time, we were isolated. We could, you know, it was just us, the studio, and you know, we didn't really know anybody there, you know. So we were just, you know, bouncing about like a little gang, you know, having lots of fun. And like, I had lots and lots of fun. You know?
What always made me laugh is that there's, you know, Bowie's story of Berlin was always like being in Philadelphia and taking so many drugs on that Station to Station album, just going completely deranged, and then moving to Berlin to sort of quieten down.
Yeah.
And I was thought, hang on a minute.
That was, you know, in Berlin, it was completely opposite for us. It was like we went out there and like we didn't have any money, so it was like, you know, we weren't, you know, doing Bowie-esque kind of amounts of powder, right? But you know, well, me especially, I mean, because you know, Mark Kelly was married at the time. I think Steve Rothery was married by then. I mean, everybody was married apart from me, you know. So I was bouncing about, and then I met up with a load of punters, and then eventually, you know, at the end of the album, you know, when we were filming the video for Kaylee, I met, you know, what was to become, you know, my first wife. So it was like,
I think
so yeah, I've got a lot of powerful.
Tamara was in that video, and there is, you know, there is your most iconic song off the most iconic album, and the model in the video becomes your wife. I mean, it's quite an amazing story. It's almost like, you know, it's somehow a movie, isn't it? That is a movie in itself. That
you're not even going to get the rest of the stories. It's like, you know, buy the book for that lot. You know? But yeah, I mean, you know, that period was incredible, and yeah, and we did that album, but we, you know, we were still mentally in that 84 position, you know. We were still a band that was still conquering America. I mean, I remember we were recognized in a McDonald's in the Kudam, right? And it was like, you know, somebody asked for a autograph and went, fish. And I was like, somebody's recognized us. We must be a big band, you know? And but then, you know, we came back, and then the album came out and Kaylee came out, and then everything changed. And no matter what you think about how it's going to go, nothing prepares you or trains you for that onslaught, for that media onslaught, and that attention that comes at you, you know, on the back of an international hit single. You know,
what was that onslaught then? What do you exactly mean by that? Because, you know, you can say it, and I can grasp it in terms of this is a big change, but I don't know what the intrusion is. I don't know what they're trying to get out of you. How you?
Well, everybody wanted to know who Kay was for a kickoff, and which I refused to do. I never ever gave her identity away, you know. And it wasn't until she died. I mean, even she kept it quiet until she sadly died of cancer quite a few years ago. And in the last day, I actually met up with her. You know, she was married with kids, and we met up, and she'd never actually heard the full album. She came up to see her cousin in Edinburgh, and we went out for lunch, and she came back to the house and met my daughter and stuff, and I gave her the album. And when I gave her the album, she said she listened to it in the car on the way home, and she said, I just cried the whole way. She said, I never realized that was what you wrote about me, you know. And but at the time in '85, everybody wanted to know who she was. And then you've got all these guys that, you know, 2 years previously had been writing you off as a Gabriel sound-alike and Marillion crap. Everybody wanted to know us, you know. Everybody wanted to be around us, you know. And that was kind of hard to take, you know, going from being the band that was trying to get attention to suddenly having all the attention you ever wanted, plus, you know. And it became quite intrusive. I love the party elements of it all. I mean, you know, you got invites to places that you would never have invites to before, and I loved it for the first part, but I think the band split up as well. And you know, because I was doing nearly all the interviews, because I was doing most of the promotion work, you know, there was a kind of separation occurred between me and the band. You know, if somebody had to go to Japan to do promo, oh well, Fish is going out, we're staying at home. And I started to resent it a little bit, you know, the fact that, you know, I was having to do all this stuff, and it was, and the gigs became bigger, they became more impersonal. I think, you know, as I said, the gang mentality started to fracture, and, you know, John Arneson, I felt, lost control. There were far too many drugs around on all quarters of the band, right? And, you know, I mean, a couple of members were a lot less than others, but I mean, you know, it might not have been cocaine, but like, you know, the alcohol rider at the back of gigs was immense. I mean, it was, you know, and, you know, it started to fall apart. And when we were on the road all the time, and we didn't have time for ourselves. And I think, you know, that was it. it was like there was no spare time. There was no, you know, I didn't go away on holidays round about then, you know, nothing, you know. And it wasn't. And then when I got together with, you know, Tamara, it was very difficult trying to keep that relationship together. And then we moved into Clutching at Straws, which was, you know, basically my resignation statement, which is still the album that I prefer out of all of the albums, you know. And
do you think you were reduced at that point? Because I remember, you know, hearing about Fish, the lead singer of Marillion, and hearing you in terms of excess, of, you know, of drinking, of being really excessive, and in a sense, taking away from the music. Do you know what I mean?
No, I don't. I think, you know, it was, you know, it was at the time of, you know, all bands. It was the 1980s. I mean, excess was applauded, you know, and you know, EMI, Brian Munns, who was my press officer at EMI, you know, he cautioned me. But it's the same with Keith Moon. I mean, the stories that went about me at that time, you know, if I lived a life as the fiction was portrayed, I wouldn't be here talking to you, right? And it was the same with Keith Moon. He wasn't out of it all the time, you know. And it was, you know, and when I left the band, there were certain parties in whose interest it was to basically portray me as being out of control, a drug addict, an alcoholic, and that was why I left the band. That was what they wanted, rather than the real reasons, right? And they were offering £12,000 for a photograph of me out my face, like falling out of a car, and they couldn't get it. They couldn't find any photographs, right? And that explains it. And it was Carol Clark, the journalist at the Melody Maker. She was offered 12 grand for a photograph of me pissed, and she said, "I don't have any of Fish out of it," right? And that was the thing. It was like, it was, yeah, there was a lot of fiction in there, you know. I mean, you know, I still love, you know, have a night off, but I don't do it every, you know. I mean, if I get plastered now, it takes me about 2 days, 3 days to recover, right?
Yeah, don't I know?
And I think, you know, when it was, you know, but back in those days, it was, you know, it was the 80s. It was mental. It was like cocaine was, you know, the drug of choice. It was everywhere. You know, you couldn't turn a corner without somebody offering you a gram of cocaine, you know. And it was, but I wasn't coked out my head all the time. I couldn't afford to be. We didn't earn that much money to have serious drug habits, you know. But yeah, but when Kaylee hit, it threw a spotlight, and, you know, as you said, you know, I was kind of propelled forward and had this kind of like Fish, the rock and roll kind of party animal vibe, you know. But it was, but I mean, you know, I make no bones about it, and I've never shied away from it. You know, I did become a bit of an asshole at that time. You know, I mean, it went to my head, you know, and it was hard, you know, controlling your ego. I mean, to be suddenly thrown into that position where everybody wanted to know you and everybody's turning around and saying you're great, who thought you were a dickhead 3 years ago, right? And then being in that and having all those accolades thrown at you, it's like, well, yeah, I'm great, I'm brilliant, you know, do this for me, do that. That lasted for a while, for about maybe a period of 3 months or so, 6 months max. But I had good people around me that turned around and they weren't scared to turn around and say, you're actually being a dickhead, right? And, you know, and when those people, I respected those people enough to listen to them, you know, and that's what kind of got me through it. But then again, when it moved into 1987, as I said, the gang mentality it seemed to be every man for himself. Everybody was doing deals and things, and, you know, and I was expected to carry on being Fish, you know. And it's like, well, I'd like my life back as well. And by that point, in 1987, I got married, and that changed the whole ballgame, you know.
Yeah, as I said at the start, that 1988 was the first interview when it was over with Marillion, and you were openly sort of discussing with me about your possible future. It felt like that you were talking about maybe going to college to study directing. I think there was something in there. You were talking about how you were writing or you wanting to write a screenplay. I don't know if you were writing already there, but you were obviously writing short stories and other things, and your lyrics and so on. How freeing was that at that period, and how worried were you at that period about your future? Because that refers to me, when I visited you, that there was a sense of worry about my future there. I knew my career was over. It was like, what the fuck am I going to do with my life?
It felt like I was going down Aylesbury again. You know, it felt like leaving the machine, because the machine was hurting me. You know, I mean, the machine had no respect for what I was as a person. You know, as a human being. You know, I was just somebody that was the lead singer in a band that made a shitload of money that a lot of people made a lot of money from, right? I mean, I think in the last year I was in the band, the manager made 4.5 times more than I did, right? Because it was like he was on, that's why we were on the road all the time, because he was sitting there on 20% of what we were making live, right? After certain costs, right? But putting that all together, that's why we were just on the road too much. And even I had people like Maurice Jones, who was a major promoter in the UK, and he just said, "You guys are over touring. You're playing too many shows," right? And because the manager was making so much money, but he knew his hat was on a sugary peg, as they say in Scotland. He knew that I was looking at him going, "This isn't right," right? And that was what all transpired in 1987. It was a culmination of all those different areas that I was unhappy with. And at this, at the same time, I think I kind of realized that I was going to lose my marriage. I could have probably lost my life, because if I lost my marriage, I'd be floating around on my own again. And, what was going to happen was I just end up getting caught up in that vicious circle, where, I mean, I would have probably turned into exactly what I wrote about in Incommunicado, and I had to get out. And when I left the band and I moved to Scotland and moved it into this place, it was so, the sense of freedom was huge. But there was also a palpable sense of excitement, because it's like, what are we going to do now? I could do anything I wanted to do. And I had the basics of the Vigil album. I had good guys around me like Mickey Simmons and Robin Bolt, and Frank Usher. And, I had this place up here where everybody stayed. So there was a little sense of community about it. So the kind of gang mentality came back into my life again. It was like, although
with the creative freedom, didn't it? It came back with a different creative freedom, because you didn't have the other guys saying, "No, we don't want you to go so long on this lyric," or "We don't want the," and then you could actually take.
But by Vigil time, I'm writing songs of Mickey like Family Business, right? Big Wedge, Gentleman's Excuse Me, State of Mind. They weren't big long prog songs. I was, and this was the thing. If you actually look at it, if you look at Clutching at Straws had Incommunicado, had Sugar Mice, Warm Wet Circles. If we'd done it properly, could have been an absolutely brilliant song, But we were starting to write songs, like proper songs, but they were complicated arrangements, but they were proper songs, and that's what I wanted to do. And in 1988, when I left the band was still writing slabs of music. They weren't writing songs; they were just joining bits together, and I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to get properly involved in song structures, and they were throwing bits of music at me, which was basically like, can you write a lyric over that? And it's like, well, actually, I've written this lyric, and this is what this lyric does, and this is kind of how I hear it. Oh, well, we don't hear it like that. We hear this. And they were just joining bits together, and it was summed up by the fact that, like, in 1988, it was Bob Ezrin who was going to be the producer of the next album. I was sent down to meet him, because the band had complained that I wasn't writing anything that was any decent. And I showed my lyric to Bob Ezrin. He went, "This is great." And he said, "Go away and write a song about drinking." He said, again, it was the Fish drinker, right? "Go and write a drinking song. You're supposed to be getting off of your head all the time. Go write a drinking song." And I went away and wrote The Company, right? And then I took the company. I sat down with Mark Kelly to try and write it, and he couldn't get it together. A simple song, he couldn't work out how to put it together, right? And I sat with Mickey Simmons, and we wrote it in an afternoon. But that was the changes, and Bob Ezrin went down to see the band and said, "Okay, play me what you got." And he said, "These aren't songs." He said, "This is just a bunch of bits," right? And I'm outside the studio listening to him going, "This is what I've been saying for the last 6 months." It's just bits that they join together, hammer them together like round pegs and square holes. Well, as long as it's 20 minutes long, they'll love it because it's got Marillion written on it. And after that, I say no more about that, But I mean, I went in with Mickey Simmons and went into songwriting, right? And there's very few times in my career where I've actually sat down and written big long songs. Weltschmerz has got long songs in it, and Rose of Damascus, but it's a sculpted song. It's properly arranged, and it's got a story to it. It's got the dynamic, which is what I wanted to do. And I think that's why I'm the 1988. The band didn't trust me anymore,
I mean, I've been in a situation in my life, as you know, I presented on MTV, and a lot of my life is defined by, he's the guy from MTV, where I was at MTV for 7 years. You know, this is comparable. You're in Marillion for about the same period. And I always feel like, wow, how can they define my life from 7 years out of 62?
Yeah, well, that's what
In a
I've
similar
got. I
way.
hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it. I appreciate it. I love what I did with Marillion, but I'm Fish now. And it's like, I mean, even now, I mean, he's still in the press, former Marillion singer Fish. I mean, for God's sake, I left the band in 1988, right? And it's like, I've done, I don't even know how many albums. I've done 12 solo albums, like it is now, but it's still former. But that happens, and Kaylee's still listening to. I mean, I hate when I'm doing radio interviews and it's like we've got Fish promoting his new album, Welsh. Here's Fish, ding 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 ding, Kaylee, and just go, why, but fair enough.
See why, though, can't you? I mean, I can see why I'm defined as something I did and left, I don't know, 30 years ago, 20, almost 30 years ago. I can see why I can be defined in that way for the people that used to watch me back then. And I can see why that you're defined for that. But I know full well, I mean, what I do today, hardly anyone knows about, and it's my total passion. And I can totally understand and be totally with you that what your passion has been throughout your life are words, and you have taken that. It's just been a process, really. Yeah. And Marillion was part of that process, but it was the most successful part of that process. So for people, other people, it's what defines you. But it doesn't define you. So,
the bottom line is Marillion was just another bunch of musicians that I worked with, and I mean, we were successful, but that had a lot to do with the juggernaut that was EMI. I mean, Kaylee would never have been a hit single without EMI, without them pulling all the stops and buying this and buying that and da-da-da. I mean, I've written songs that I consider, equally as good as Kaylee, but they've never been heard, because they never got played on radio, because I mean, and when I had almost my numbers, right, since I've really gone solo, since I went independent, I never had the backup, I never had the machine, I didn't have the finances, I didn't have the resources to really push those singles, right? And but when I die, there's still great songs, I mean, nothing's going to take that away from them, and I'm quite happy with that. But my whole life changed. I mean, like I said, money did not drive me, right? It never drove me, right? And it was never, the addiction to fame. I didn't really like being famous. I felt a lot of time it was an intrusion. I mean, I've always said that, being famous, it can get you a table at the best restaurant, but you can be guaranteed there's going to be a lot more waiters hanging about waiting on tips, right? And that's where it goes. And like now, I mean, Weltschmerz has sold about 15,000, 17,000 albums, which for an independent label is great.
It's respectable.
I don't have a distribution deal. We sell it from here. So everything we make, my wife and I deal with the whole company thing here. And, on a Monday, we will wake up and there will be 200 orders waiting to be fulfilled that came generated through the Fish and Friday program that I do in Facebook for free. Even though people say, you should sell this. And it's like, I don't want it because I'm enjoying doing it. And I'm giving something to people and making them happy, right? That are sitting on their own in houses, right? So I'm not going to charge them for that. It's like, I can do it. It makes me feel happy, makes them feel happy. And that was kind of like one of the reasons. That's the same person that left Marillion, right? And it was, I hated going on stage at the Ahoy in Rotterdam, and the only time you ever saw the venue was at the sound check. And then after that, when you walked out, there was 2 super troopers in your eye. You could see the first 4 meters of fans. When somebody shouted out something from the front and you did a snappy, funny answer, the people at the back only heard one side of the joke, right? And it was, and then you come off stage and then you've got 100 people backstage that you're paying for their canopies and their champagne and everything like that. And you don't even know who they are, right? And you're not being asked, oh, this is so-and-so, the head of such and such. It's like, you know what? I've just come off stage and I don't really want to talk to anybody, and I'd rather be my mates, or I'd rather go down the road and go in a bar, right? And that was what makes me happy. Yeah. And so when I left Marillion, I got all that back. And, it's a lot. The first couple of years we were doing, I'm still doing big gigs, but now You know, I'm really happy with where I am. I've got a bloody Skoda out in the front, you know. I don't have a Lamborghini. I don't have a holiday home. I don't have a mansion in the Loire Valley or whatever. You know, I don't have a yacht. You know, the thing we spend most of our money on is the garden or season tickets for a Birmingham football club, right? And that's what my wife and I have got, really simple tastes. You know, I mean, although it's lockdown, I mean, you know, even when it wasn't lockdown, we might go out to a restaurant maybe once, twice a month, maybe, you know. And, you know, I go on Easter Road, I walk about with no security guards. You know, we don't have, you know, I don't have that hassle. You know, I'm just a punter, you know. And that's what I like. And, you know, like I said, I mean, with the albums we sell, it's like we make more money off them than we'd ever make off an EMI deal where, you know, I'm getting paid 10 pence a CD or whatever it was, you know. And it's like, you know, it's under my control and I can do what I want and I like it. And I don't have the pressures of having to do things. I'm doing this for you because I want to do it because it's fun. I don't feel like it's a big thing about promoting an album. I'm having a discussion and a conversation with you, you know.
One thing's really interesting, because when we talked the other day with setting this up, is that, you know, I mean, Weltschmerz is conceived as the last album, or it's what it says on your website. Yep, okay. And you're going to be, hopefully, COVID permitting, you're going to go have a tour in some way, and that will probably be your last tour. How do you feel at this moment in time of sort of closing that area of your life down? Or is that just like, well, you might do a bit more, or is that really the close down? Is that for you the end of that creative period of your life?
It's got, I mean, I've got Vigil and Internal XL, my first two albums. I've got to remaster them, and we've got to put a couple of really good deluxe box sets together. Redoing 13 Star. I've got a live album coming out, so I've got that to do. Okay, but I'm not writing any more music. You know, I mean, that's it. I mean, I made the decision in 2015. You know, in 2015 I was dealing with a bad spine problem. I had a terrible rotator cuff injury, and that I picked up when I was diving in Cuba, and getting on a dive boat in a storm down at Guantanamo Bay. Boat went up, and I was getting on the boat when put my arm on the ladder just as the boat went up about 1.5 meters, and I either hung on to that, and my tanks and everything were on the boat, right, and I had my fins were off, and I was in a storm, and the boat went up, and it ripped my entire. It tore my muscle in about 3 places up there, right? Luckily, it was my last dive down in Santiago de Cuba. And it was, so, you know, I had all that in 2015. And I went, you know what? I didn't face the consequences, which I loved as an album. I loved writing it, and I loved the research. I loved the words. And I got the high wood in particular, you know, to design the high wood, right, lyrically and as a story, and to make it all clip. It was like writing a movie. Right? And I've always wanted to write screenplays, as we discussed, you know, way back in '88. I've always been into movies. I should have done more acting, but I couldn't act because I wasn't allowed to, because I was in a band whose manager was earning a fucking shitload of money off us touring, right? And if I did a movie and went on a set for two months, what did the band do? So we're going on the road, you can't do the movie, right? And I auditioned for a load of great films back then, right? And screenplays were always, you know, always part of the writing. It's always been, you know, just basically a very complicated lyric, right? And you know, it's still good. Anyway, but I mean,
but if you're not going to write songs,
but in 2015, I went as an end game, and I've got one more. I felt I've got one more great album. I didn't want to finish on a dud firework. I wanted to leave my solo career in the same way as I left Marillion, with the best album that I've made, right? And I've done that with Weltschmerz, right? It's Weltschmerz I love as an album. I can listen to Weltschmerz and I just go like, this is fucking great, right? I love it, right? But that's it. You know, I don't want to do what Emerson, Lake and Palmer did with Love Beach, or like some other bands have done, you know, where it's like, oh, well, you know, we'll just scrape the last part of what we can get out of the fans. I went, no, that's it. And again, there's a feeling of exhilaration in the same way as when I left Marillion. There's a sense of exhilaration because it's like, I'm doing this, you know, like, blah, blah. And COVID has thrown a toolbox into the works, you know, because, you know, I should have been out last year doing the Weltschmerz tour. This year, at the end of this year, I should have been starting my farewell tour. 2022, it was all going to end. Right now, I don't even think I'm going to be doing gigs this year. I can't see them happening. In all reality, I am mentally prepared, fully mentally prepared for everything to get taken in a field and shot in the head, right? And, you know, in 2022, most of the venues are booked that I really want to play. So 2023 will be the farewell tour, but I don't know if that will happen. So, I mean, it has been, you know, I'm having to reset myself in so many ways. You know?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And you know, finally, this sort of the greatest passion, it seems, you know, or one of the greatest passions. I'm no detriment to the relationships you've had in your life and your wife now. But one of the greatest passions in your life has been music. Clearly, you know, an amazing passion that spans practically all your life. You know, from the music you heard as a child to the music you made through all your incarnations to the last album, Weltschmerz. And now that is coming to an end. Where will you put your passion? Where will that go? Because somehow you need an outlet, don't you? That has to have an outlet, whatever it is. Could be anything. Doesn't have to be.
What it is. It's writing. It's writing and screenplay writing. It's writing screenplays, and you know, it's like I want to write. I want to. There's an autobiography that's obvious, but I don't think it's going to be a straightforward autobiography. I think it's going to be more a series of memoirs. You know, and there's also creative writing. That, you know, I've got a folder down there with ideas that have been sketched out or typed out, you know, over the years that I've never put. I found it the other day when I was cleaning out the controller. I'm like, fuck, I forgot about that. And there's ideas to do that, but I mean, I can play about with it. But music is not the passion in my life now. I listen to music and it can still move me, but I'm not one of these people that can scour Spotify for the latest thing or whatever. It bores me now. I think the music business has changed. The music business is not the same music business that I joined. I mean, I remember Robin Bolt saying to me one time, he said, the music business, he said, it used to be capital M, small b, right? And now it's small m, capital B, right? And that's the change that I don't like. You know, I don't like, you know, it's all numbers now, and it's not albums anymore. It's tracks, it's downloads, it's streams. And I write albums. Weltschmerz is an album, right? I don't go out, I can't go out and just write a track. I've got to write an album, you know? And I don't want to write tracks, you know? And you know, and I've just fallen out of love with it. It's just changed so much, you know, that the business has just taken over the enjoyment, you know? And, you know, and I'm not naive and I'm not being stupid, you know, like, I mean, I've always understood that, you know, there's always been the business in the music, you know, but it dominates it now, you know? And I think the demands, you know, I mean, I think, and being a celebrity now, I mean, being a celebrity back in the mid 1980s, I mean, now, I mean, the fish that existed in 1985, I would be victim of cancel culture now, right? And, you know, I wouldn't get away with what I used to do back in the mid 80s, you know? And I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be a fucking celebrity, you know? And it's, I like my private life. My wife and I are really close. She's my soulmate. And, you know, and I don't want to be away from her. You know, I mean, if I'm doing a farewell tour, you know, I want my wife on the road every day, you know? And it's, and we're going to be able to do that. And, you know, and I want to have fun. I mean, when I do my farewell tour, you know, everybody I've talked to, it's like when I do my farewell tour, what I'd like to play is 2 nights in a venue that I really love, that I've loved over the years, right? 2 nights, 2 different sets, not on a tour bus, drive to the venues, drive to the, you know, stay in a hotel, meet up with friends in the various cities, have a laugh, enjoy it, and just have a shitload of fun and say goodbye that way. In the future, if I want to go out and play, I don't want to go out with an electric band. I mean, I might do a gig with a band, but not a tour, you know. But I mean, I don't think I'll do festivals or whatever, because it's too much a faff to get everybody together. But I mean, what I could do is, if I really want to get the buzz, is go out what I did on the Fish Heads Club tour, which was one of my favourite tours that I ever did. which was myself, a guitarist, and a keyboard player, and just going out and playing small places and just having a little shitload of fun, you know, having lunch I saw more of Germany on the Fishheads Club tour than I saw in all the years previous, right? And, you know, and if I want to go out, I could go out and spend 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and I could make enough money to keep myself going for the year if I needed to go out, if I wanted the buzz. Otherwise, I prefer to be in my garden. I prefer to be here writing and working with people and doing something else. I need, you know, this is another stage in my life. You know, this is the next stage in my life now.
I think that's brilliant. And I'll tell you what, when you come to Germany, I'm going to come and visit you, and I'm going to pay for the canopies. I'm going to pay for the alcohol for the night out to pay you back for that brilliant weekend in 1995.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews. And here is where you can connect.